Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to the National Coalition of Promise Zones 2020 Federal Convening. We have a great presentation for you today, and it is titled Engaging the Regulatory Agencies to Advance Promise Zone Goals. My name is Julius Austin. I am the Sacramento Promise Zone Coordinator for the Sacramento Promise Zone here in Sacramento, California. And maybe, unfortunately, for some of you, you are going to see a lot of me today because I'm going to be doing a little double duty. So I'm your uh, Zoom host for today, and I also will be a part of the presentation today. Really grateful that I've been asked to be a part of the presentation by our FDIC partner, Spike Kale, who you will learn a little bit more about shortly. But before we get started and I pass this over to our awesome moderator, Dr. Michael Huff, I want to just go over a couple of housekeeping items. One, we want to notify you all that the presentation is being recorded. It will be simultaneously recorded on Zoom and on Facebook Live on the Sacramento Promise Zone Facebook page. But the great part about that is you will be able to go back and view this presentation on the Sacramento Promise Zone Facebook page. And you also have the ability to view all of the presentations that have taken place during the National Coalition of Promise Zones 2020 Federal Convening. And so please take advantage of that. There's been some great presentations, some great information shared that really could be beneficial to you, your organization, or to your Promise Zone area. Also would like to ask all participants to please remain muted throughout the presentation. Though you are muted, you will still have ample opportunity to ask questions or make comments by using the chat box. Our moderator, Dr. Michael Huff, will be monitoring the chat box so that he can pose questions or make comments to the presenters. And also we have some other folks who will be supporting him in that effort so that we don't miss any of your questions or comments. And we have some time allocated at the end of the presentation for a Q&A session as well. And if we, for some reason, do not get to your questions or comments, we definitely will be forwarding those questions to the presenters so that they will be answered at a later time. So without further ado, I would like to pass the baton over to our moderator, Dr. Michael Huff.
Thank you, Julius. Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who is attending and participating. Welcome to September 1st, 2020. And you are in for a real treat this afternoon, because this is one of the collaborative programs I have to tell you that you are definitely going to want to replicate. So we'll make sure we cover it and give you the information. We're going to actually have a team of people reviewing an innovative model of place-based collaboration for building community resilience and sustainability. And what's powerful about it is it's actually a truly win-win situation. It illustrates and exemplifies what happens when you have banks working in close collaboration with nonprofits for community benefit. So let me introduce you to the chief architects of this program. The first person, actually a man who needs no introduction, he's part of the NCPZ Dream Team. That's Julius Austin. And you met him previously as he just introduced himself, but some things you don't know about Julius. He has worked for almost 2 decades in the education and nonprofit sector. He specializes in cross collaboration between sectors and place-based initiatives. He's actually passionate about the work that allows to empower underserved communities. And during the time he's working at the Sacramento Promise Zone, he's also mentoring and leading and helping to nurture 5 AmeriCorps VISTA volunteers. Julius has a Bachelor of Science and Mathematics from Rochester University and a Master of Business Administration from Drexel University. And one thing you need to know, as we've seen the NBA starting back up, basketball is something that's close to Julius. During college, he was a two-time All-American in basketball, and he led Rochester to the 2004 USCAA National Championship as captain and team MVP. So Julius is one of the key members on the team. Second, we have Petter Bruce from Umkai Bank. Petter is the Vice President and Community Development Officer. He has a 5-state footprint: Oregon, Washington, California, Idaho, and Nevada. He operates as the community and economic development link between the bank and the communities it serves in the states I mentioned, with a focus on stakeholder engagement and corporate social responsibility, which is something that's really important. He has 16 years in the financial services industry on the boards of a program called the Center for Fathers and Families, Sacramento Employment and Economic Development Corporation. He has earned his bachelor's degree in managerial economics from UC Davis. And rounding out the team and serving as the, I guess, the session moderator today is Christopher Spike Kale from the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. He is the community affairs specialist with the FDIC, and his responsibilities include promoting FDIC initiatives. One is one of the ones, the session that you'll hear about today, focused on economic inclusion, community development, small business, as well as promoting compliance, but really supporting and understanding the Community Reinvestment Act. Fosters collaborative efforts among financial institutions, community-based organizations, municipal entities, and underserved communities. He joined the FDIC in May 2011 rather, and prior to working with the FDIC, he served with the the administration with the Brown and Schwarzenegger administrations in the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. So he's versed in the issues related to California. He is a graduate of California State University, Sacramento, and holds a bachelor's degree in communications. As you can see, we've got a winning team of subject matter experts lined up for you today. So I'm going to stop talking and let the panel give you this information. Spike, please take it away.
All right, Spike, you're on mute there.
Thank you very much, Michael. Sorry for the muting, and thank you all for participating in the presentation today. I am delighted to highlight this really interesting collaborative that is now 5 years in the running. As Michael already covered, we're going to be having more of a conversation today among Julius, Petter, and myself, whom each will be providing different insights into their perspectives and the critical elements of how the Sacramento Financial Institution Partnership Opportunity Initiative came to be. We're going to touch on a number of different issues, but I think in a broad strokes, our intention is really to share the story of what this collaborative is and help others develop similar objectives that target and align capital in place-based initiatives. We certainly encourage the development of these sustainable collaborative ecosystems that align these initiatives. And we're going to highlight some of the strategies and approaches that communities might be able to engage to help leverage local banks and funders toward achieving their community objectives. So we already got a nice overview about me, but just a little bit more about community affairs. We assist financial institutions in developing strategies that are responsive to the credit service and investment needs of their communities, and really with a focus on CRA, the Community Reinvestment Act. We also collaborate with diverse stakeholders, such as Julius, municipal agencies, other state and federal agencies, local nonprofit organizations, and others to really help foster community development initiatives in any way we can. I'd like to hand it off to Julius, just a little bit more about the Sacramento Promise Zone and his work.
All right, so you all heard a little bit about me. As the Sacramento Promise Zone coordinator, I direct the daily operations of the Sacramento Promise Zone under the ultimate direction of Tyrone Roderick Williams. Our lead agency is the Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment Agency, which is led by our executive director, Lachelle Dozier. We're a joint power authority, which means we are the housing authority for both the city of Sacramento and the county of Sacramento. Most folks on the call probably are aware of what promise zones are, so I won't go deep into that, but specifically in regards to the Sacramento Promise Zone, it is 22 square miles, parts of North, Mid, and South Sacramento, and we are focused on jobs, economic development, education, health, and sustainably built communities. And we have been able to improve the Promise Zone to include hundreds of partners across all sectors. So elected officials, leaders of the school districts here. We have two school districts in our Promise Zone, college and university partners. Also the leaders of nonprofits, businesses, and other community leaders. And we work to engage with all of those partners to increase or expand their existing projects, programs, or initiatives, or to work and partner and collaborate to create new projects, programs, and initiatives. And we do that by connecting partners together, by connecting partners or supporting partners in their efforts to obtain funding. We also share info about the great work that they're doing and share information about the opportunities that each partner may have for other potential partners or for the community at large. And so that's a little bit about our Promise Zone. I mentioned that we work to create new projects, programs, initiatives, and the financial institution partnership initially, and now what we're calling the funding institution partnership opportunity. FIPO for short is one of the great examples of what the Promise Zones are all about in regards to collaborating together, getting people out of their silos to create greater impact for the communities that need it the most.
Thank you, Julius. Now an introduction of a little bit more about Petter.
Thank you, Spike. I think, I apologize if I'm lagging a little bit. There we go. I'm competing with a family full of school and work all on Zoom today. So at Umpqua Bank, so we're actually a large bank. We are, the FDIC is our regulator. And as you can see the size of our bank here with our deposit, it's about $25 billion. So we're located, we actually have a history from small town Oregon. For those of you who are not familiar with the West Coast and our history, we started in Canyonville, Oregon, and that was back in 1953. We've definitely expanded since then, and we're now in 5 states, as Michael mentioned previously. Our company is, we have many services serving our consumers, small businesses, middle-sized businesses, corporate or commercial banking, wealth, and home lending as well. So we've got a good variety of financial services for our communities that we serve. We do, what I didn't include here, but important to the conversation today, we are fortunate to have a foundation at Umpqua Bank that manages about $3.5 million in contributions through our quarterly program each year. So we're fortunate to have that program in effect. 2 of our focus areas for giving are educational attainment and economic opportunity. So some great alignment with the Promise Zone as well in Sacramento. It's an honor to be here. And just one note to our team, we have a strong corporate responsibility team here at Umpqua Bank. I'm just one part of the team. Fortunately, I only cover California and Nevada. My peers, who I believe some are with us today, cover Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, amongst others. So it's a pleasure to be here, and we're just proud to be a part of this Promise Zones initiative and the FIPO collaborative.
Thank you, Petter. Now, this is an informal group, the three of us, so if anyone has questions, please link those in the chat box and we'll find an opportunity to jump into the presentation to clarify or provide any detail to the slides here. But I certainly, as we think about sort of setting the purpose and intention of why this is an opportunity or a potential need, I want to be very clear that this was not created by some grand design or strategy, but really happened by accident. And we've been sort of growing and evolving this collaborative since. But certainly looked at utilizing the Promise Zone designation to help maximize the impact of what this could be, and really addressing concerns and challenges around federal, state, and local resources to address ongoing community development needs and economic development needs on an ongoing basis. Thinking about how we can create more intentional, de-siloed conversations, and figuring out a way to align the resources, capital, and already intentional work happening by many different actors under sort of a single ecosystem or intentional focus to move people together. So I think there's a number of different applications and reasons why and how a bank or funder collaborative can add value. Across the nation, there are a number of different elements where it can be attached or connected to help elevate the impact and overall intersections of work by diverse players within a market. To give a very high-level overview of FIPO, we are now in year 5. This is a bank funder collaborative, which is facilitated by the Sacramento Housing Redevelopment Agency and the FDIC, which helps to, be a facilitator and help to convene meetings. It originally, as I said, came by accident via a meeting that we organized in 2016. A byproduct of that was a group of banks that said, we're not really sure what our link is within the Promise Zone, but we'd love to sort of be reconvened just banks and to help think about it and figure it out. And that sort of led to a sort of engagement and focus around collectively targeting and funding CRA eligible projects and trying to align the capital and resources of those entities to projects meeting the Promise Zone goals. So certainly having SHRA and the Promise Zone engaged to help connect the entities and funders together to projects was of tremendous value and importance. So a little bit more about how this entity is structured. This collaborative, I think, is most unique because it's informal. So there's no dues or a very formal you are or are not a partner. One of the primary sayings within the group is that it's bank and funder led, bank and funder driven. So FDIC helps to facilitate conversations as a non-bank and non-funder who can be sort of a intermediary in the process. And then with the Promise Zone helping to provide insights of local community partners, community needs within the Promise Zone context of those objectives. And they really prioritize as sort of as being high impact, and which is a broad level trying to evolve where they focus and prioritize the activities and outcomes of the work that takes place. And the RFP that has become sort of a fundamental backbone of the collaborative process has evolved a lot over time, but both in its focus and how it's structured, but seeks to identify and align with the Promise Zone objectives around economic activity, creating jobs, increasing educational opportunities, and focusing on affordable housing. So I'm not going to read through this list here, but I'd like to pivot it to Julius. Could you speak a little bit just to, in this process, SHRA's role, providing support, and helping to be a facilitator of this process?
Certainly. So our role is to really help handle the logistics and the facilitation of meetings. we handle the communications out to community-based organizations in regards to notifying them about the Financial Institution Partnership Opportunity RFP process and forwarding the RFP out to the CBOs. We help with the creation. Sounds like we have an individual who is, I can handle that. Sorry, I'm the host as well, so I was able to mute the individuals who came off mute. I apologize for the interruption. But we also, we help with the creation of the RFP. As Spike mentioned, this is very funder-led and funder-driven. So ultimately, we create the RFP in the format and the way that the funding institutions determine. And then we are in charge of collecting those RFPs from the CBOs, and then we provide them to the funding institutions so that they can go through them and make determinations on which projects they would like to fund. So ultimately what we do is increase the capacity of the funders to carry out the entire process.
Thank you, Julius. 7 steps sounds like a really easy process, but there's a lot of things that take place, and some of Julius mentioned in between. Petter, if I can ask you, as a banker is participating in this process, what are the unique elements or variables, whether they're listed here or not, that you think are really important for those think about implementing something in this realm to help understand?
Yes, absolutely, Spike. One of the initial things that struck me as very unique about this opportunity when it was born is that it provided, here you have multiple partners between yourself at FDIC and Julius with SHRA. These partners bringing together this focus for the Promise Zone, it gave financial institutions and those in a funder position the opportunity to get to know one another. You would think that we all do know each other. In some cases we do. It's a small industry, but it is a great way to facilitate those relationships, which is really important. At the same time,
Petter, if I could ask you a follow-up.
FIPO.
I'm sorry.
Yes. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I apologize. I thought you were done. I wanted to ask a follow-up. So the indented number 1 and 2, it has this sort of range of 50,000 to 150,000, and then larger projects being considered. Could you just speak to that unique, how that is written and how that's intended to be projected outward, and how the group sort of identifies projects and moves things forward?
Yes. Yes, it's kind of a delicate process. Initially, when the group met, we realized we wanted to focus on high impact opportunity fund. And without being able to commit to a solid dollar figure, I don't think any funder can speak on behalf of their foundation that they can commit a certain amount of money right off the bat. At least not all the partners could, but we could at least, we wanted to aim high, to use that phrase well. We wanted to make sure that folks that saw this RFP understood we were looking for high impact opportunities, so we needed to make sure the dollar amount we were talking about was sufficient. And also understanding that some of those committed dollars wouldn't be confirmed until the final RFP or the final grant proposal was chosen. So it is a little bit of a delicate process. Timing can be interesting, but once we did agree on that final project to fund, we were able to take that back to our foundation committees or our community affairs managers to review those and get final commitments. And then you're able to see the final dollar amounts that were invested. Does that help, Spike?
That does. Thank you.
You bet.
All right, Spike, we have a couple questions in the chat box. Would you like for us to pose those questions now and answer those questions now, or would you like for us to wait?
Please go ahead.
So Rick Kim asks, are you redirecting local support dollars through this process, or have you been able to access additional funds? And so I'll let Pedar answer that first, and then I can chime in if necessary.
And I'm sorry, Julius, I missed the last part of the question. Can you repeat?
All right, I'll repeat it. So Rick M asks, are you redirecting local support dollars through this process, or have you been able to access additional funds?
I can only speak for Umpqua Bank, and yes, this would be local support funds from our foundation. We don't have additional dollars that we're able to find, but that might be the case with other financial.
All right, and I'll just add from my perspective, this is an opportunity for us to engage with funding institutions and get them to focus the CRA dollars that they already have allocated for the area and funnel those dollars to Promise Zone area CBOs. And that kind of leads to the second question that we have in the chat box, which is the RFP only for organizations located in the Promise Zone? And so it's not totally focused on organizations located in the Promise Zone, but it is focused on CBOs that are either in the Promise Zone or are doing work to impact individuals who work, live, and play in the Promise Zone. And then we have a third question from Sandy Curd, one of our partners in the Promise Zone. She said the Kentucky Promise Zone does not have any banks large enough to offer CRA grants. How many does Sacramento have? And Spike, you may be best to answer that question if you are aware of how many banks have the ability in Sacramento area in regards to CRA grants.
So the statement being doesn't have banks of the size to offer grants. I don't know that that's necessarily the case. So certainly banks of very wide ranges, have different capacity of what their grant budget is. I think banks of any size probably have some grant budget, even if it's much smaller than others. But I think in Sacramento, there is somewhere around 40 or so different banks that are based or have market share of deposits within the Sacramento MSA. But I don't have a specific, that's a general range. I don't have the specific number with me.
I'd also like to add to that for Sandy is that the beauty of this opportunity is getting the banks to intentionally collaborate together so that there is a larger impact. And so what that allows for is that if there's a number of small banks who normally have a small amount of CRA giving, if they could pool that funding together, then that would allow there to be a greater impact. So I would still look at the opportunity to duplicate something like this, even with a number of small banks.
And I would also encourage you to engage your regional community affairs representative from, or one of the regulatory agencies who can help to identify who those banks are within the market, their asset size, and help clarify any who's there and what alignment or engagement there may be, those priorities, and just knowing those institutions well. So I'm glad we have Petter on, because I believe Petter has been a participant in all of these successes to date that have come to fruition, as well as sort of additional less items and outcomes and partnerships that have maybe happened under the radar as part of this FIPO process. So Petter, a couple questions for you. First, could you highlight maybe a specific partnership from these years, in 2017 to 2020 that resonates most with you?
You bet. I'm going to give you a very democratic answer here, Spike. Every year has had some incredible successes. But in particular, I did want to share one example of an awardee that that had a great program that was brought to light through this process. Alchemist CDC, it's a local community development corporation. They're an innovative organization. They're not necessarily huge, but they have the ability to meet some of the community's needs in unique ways. They actually manage the EBT process for food stamp dollars at our local farmers markets. And they were one of the first organizations to connect those dots so that our community members could purchase food that way. But what they did is they brought together a proposal through this process to launch an idea they had for what they called their Alchemist Micro Enterprise Academy. And essentially it was a small business or a small food business incubator program. And with that idea, it's something they had in the plans, but by being awarded in the year they were chosen, which I believe was 2018, I think, that was the $137,000 award. It was enough to launch their program, and it's continuing strong today. So much so that the city of Sacramento is talking to them about taking on cohorts of small businesses to this day. So it was a standout awardee amongst other standouts.
And as you can see by the number of entities that are participating funders changes every single year. It's an informal. There is not a set list of who will and who will not. So some entities fund every year, every other year, just once. And you see in the people who are participating at a broad level in the conversations leading up to it is continuing to grow each year. Petter, another question. Under that capacity building partnership, I know this is a outcome you were a part of. Could you talk about how that came to fruition? You know, what it looked like and the conversations that led to it?
Sure. Yeah, that was kind of a unique spin-off of FIPO that year. There were 4 large bank funders in this program, and partway through the FIPO process, the RFP had been submitted or sent out. They realized that the pool of funders that year was sufficient to fund the program that was being chosen at the end, and they realized that the funds they had to give, they had each dedicated $25,000 each, which was phenomenal. But they realized it was more than what the RFP process could handle. The capacity, the award or the grant proposal was for far less. So they realized they had an opportunity to do something else. They had heard of a lot of need in terms of the expertise, the capacity of local nonprofits, and even some that had applied in this process. And they connected the dots with a local organization called Impact Foundry, who created their certified sustainable professional development program for local nonprofits to go through. So what better way to kind of support some of these other organizations that were applying than to offer this capacity building partnership along with the FIPO awardee. So it all came from the same process, but it just it kind of took on a new some new energy that year, and it continues to this day.
And one last question, Petter. Through this RFP process, obviously 1 or 2 entities out of that full list are selected, but that could be 10 or 30 different RFPs that come through. So, a bank may or not be part of that funding cohort at the end, but there's this great awareness of all these different entities within the market that aren't selected. And so sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't hear about the partnerships that may happen, outside of the FIPO process. Can you talk about an entity that you engaged and worked with through this RFP process?
Yes, certainly. And became, one of the top 4 candidates for the FIPO award, but were not chosen. One in particular that stood out at the time was a great fit for our investment at the time was Kavanaugh. It's a local nonprofit here in Sacramento. It's actually a husband and wife who created their own housing solution for homeless veterans.
Thanks, Petter. So over the years, we've had a total of 17 different funding entities who've participated 1 year, multiple years. This is just a full list, a very diverse group of entities whom have participated. So we have a pretty wide list here of overall funders. I'd love to get Petter's insights once again. If you could emphasize, whether it's listed here or not, any specific benefit that you've identified as a banker engaging and working within the FIPO process that you'd like to highlight?
Petter, you're on mute.
Thank you so much. Great question, Spike. So there's a lot of learnings that can happen through this process. In particular, meeting your peers and understanding their funding priorities is really helpful. If you think of bank funders, it's typically a small group of people, maybe handling large territories like California and Nevada. So it definitely helps to leverage this network to understand who does fund specific types of work. So you can refer each other to, important projects that come along with nonprofits. So it's kind of like having a network that, without FIPO, honestly would have taken me years to get to know all of these organizations and the work they do. So it truly is, it's just it's a great way to be efficient in spreading the word about the types of projects happening in your Promise Zone too. And then finally too, before this process came along, I think banks we all participated in the meetings with Julius to understand more about the Promise Zone. But having FIPO and this collaboration really gave us a way to sink our teeth into how we could participate and help make a difference in the Promise Zone.
Thanks, Petter. And one thing I'd like to emphasize as well, if you on the right-hand side, differentiating the large banks to the small banks who participated. From a large bank perspective, I think leveraging the capital and resources from other similar funders or even cross-sector entities is often a priority that they're looking for to help fund impactful projects. And for some institutions in California, a little bit of context, a lot of institutions in there are housed in with their expertise in the Bay Area or the greater Los Angeles area, and so areas such as Sacramento and the Sacramento Valley or other places throughout the Central Valley don't have all those individuals who participate in FIPO live and are based there. So for markets where a lot of that expertise and staff may not reside and know that market as well as the market that they live and reside in, it's a great way to sort of bring them into and consistently engage in the ecosystem with like-minded entities. For smaller banks who may have sort of a smaller budget and smaller staff or expertise, they're able to engage with larger funders to leverage some of their philanthropic or foundation experts and staff and resources to help identify high impact projects. Additionally, some are just looking from a compliance oriented mindset. There's okay, where do I identify projects and partners meeting CRA to just meet our capital goals for our CRA exam? And they can leverage and engage this process to identify not just projects, but high impact projects that may speak more positively and receive more CRA consideration during their exam. So we've kind of mentioned a number of different benefits to the community. Julius, I wonder if you might expand a little bit about any specific perspective from from the municipality or from a community value that FIPO has been bringing to Sacramento.
Certainly. So, of course, the projects that are funded are definitely impacted because it allows them to either begin a new program or to increase the impact of a program that they already have, um, that they're already working on. But it increases the vitality and the impact of those CBOs. Bedar mentioned the capacity building efforts that were funded. I mean, when you look at 30 nonprofits being able to go through capacity building training and learn how to improve their fundraising, or how to increase the effectiveness of their boards, or many other things that they learn from the Impact Foundry. Then you talk about expanding the impact of all of those nonprofits. And so that's definitely beneficial to the Promise Zone area. And just the establishment of relationships, whether it be the relationships of the banks to work together, whether it be the relationships of the funding institutions to the Promise Zone, or more importantly, whether it be the relationships established for the CBOs with the funding organizations, so that they can work together to fund projects, even if it's outside of the FIPO opportunity. And so that's how the impact is created, and it has made a huge difference in the Promise Zone.
Thank you, Julius. And one thing I want to point out, so bullet 3 around creating an ecosystem. Right now, the FIPO platform has really focused around grants and volunteerism, but a high priority that has been identified and is an ongoing project is how to develop a collaborative process to increase the number of community development loans and investments through a similar collaborative process that could take place. That's not active currently, but it's a long-term project that's in discussions by a number of the collaborators within the group. So a little just kind of looking backwards, what's happened recently and where the group is trying to move in the future. This started as the FIPO, financial institutions, but recently integrated non-bank funders like credit unions, foundations, and philanthropy. They've engaged local nonprofit and community leaders to help increase overall awareness and engagement with FIPO, to not just understand what it is and how it works, but increase the number of RFPs and overall engagement in FIPO. As I mentioned previously, there's an intention to develop a community development lending pipeline strategy. In California and Sacramento, there's also an affordable housing challenge, in which there's a desire and conversations at a local level to try to create some type of affordable housing fund that would be a CRA investment vehicle. And my personal biggest disappointment is that COVID has dashed our intentions to have a strategic planning meeting that was planned for April this year, that was really going to take a step back to think about the fundamentals of what a funder collaborative is, ideally would look like, and do, as over these 5 years, we've kind of been building the plane continuously as we've been flying it. So really being able to engage everyone and think more intentionally about how we can elevate the overall impact and value and community benefits of FIPO. I'd like to speak to Julius and Petter, if you have a specific challenge or lesson learned over these 5 years that kind of resonates, or you think is most important to share with those interested in replicating a similar type of collaborative.
I'll defer to you, Petter, if you'd like to go first.
Got it, Julius. Yeah, absolutely. This is my favorite part. We have so much to learn, and I think we've done a good job of tweaking this each year based on the lessons learned the year before. But one of the things lessons learned, I think, and you've seen this right now, having a structure to this process has become, we all learned, one of the most critical pieces of making this work. So I feel fortunate that between Spike's facilitation and all the organizational power and manpower behind SHRA and Julius and his team has made a world of difference in making this happen. When the program first started, it was an initial idea to collaborate amongst some financial institutions, but I think without the structure, it's really hard to get something like this and stay focused for several years in a row. So wanted to start with that because that's really important. I wanted to also mention that transparency too. Understanding everyone's motivations for collaborating is really important right off the bat. Because we realized, and I think we had it happen a few times where if a funding partner didn't understand the focus right off the bat, you know, it's an investment of time to be a part of all the meetings as you put this together, and then especially as you get close to the RFP process and reviewing grants, that you want to make sure that everyone has buy-in and on the purpose and the focus of the program. So I'll start there, and feel free to jump right in, Julius.
Yeah, so I'll jump in on that. I think your points are definitely exactly that, on point. But collaboration definitely takes more time than going at it alone. And though it does take a little bit more time, the end result is what we talk about a lot, which is more impact. And if we can get folks to recognize that and focus on that, I think ultimately, you know, the end goal will be met. A little quick example is, you know, to do something as simple as create a press release about the funding of a project or a couple of projects. If I was to just do the press release on my own, it would be done in a short amount of time. But if we have to have each institution double check that press release and add their inputs, or maybe have their information officer review it and all that kind of stuff, it may take a couple months for it to come out. But in the end, it still comes out, and it's okay that it took a little bit longer time because there's more of us working together. So.
Thank you, Julius and Petter. And the one I'd like to emphasize is the importance of identifying a quarterback or lead entity. Certainly SHRA has, you know, take for granted the work that they've done in 5 years, and not just being there from the beginning, but the sustainability and continuity and the momentum of continuing this going. As someone who's tried to replicate this in other markets, I think that's really the first step. Is whom would be the ongoing entity, the backbone and the spine that sort of keeps it all together. And our last slide here, and certainly we encourage any people to submit questions on any part of this. You know, Julius and Petter, I'd love to get any feedback on what's critical that stands out that you really want to emphasize as people, you know, their primary takeaways about can we replicate this? What's the biggest thing for them to consider and engage with?
Petter, please.
Yeah, sure. I'll jump right in here. I think we've done. You've mentioned some killer points there along the way. Spike, having SHRA be the entity that's kind of carried the ball year to year has been critical. I'm going to throw in here communication too, and that goes for when you're working with funders, making sure that they are working internally, so that, because leaders in each one of those organizations should know about this. You don't know what could come from that. You might get more funds to go into something like this, but making sure that every organization is aware of this collaboration going on. But then communication between funders and your quarterback organization or your facilitator in Spike. I think it's not possible to over communicate, I think, on something like this, because there's a lot of players. And the other thing I wanted to just end with is thinking of the experience of the nonprofit organizations, the folks that are applying for this funding. I think is really important to keep in mind, kind of keep that top of mind. So the last thing we want to do is burden them with an incredible amount of work for this. So I think keeping a good idea of the experience they have, especially as they're applying.
I would just add that a commitment to presence is really important. It's really important that you identify entities that are going to make sure that they're present in all of the meetings and are going going to engage in all of the communications that Pedar mentioned that are so important. We take the time that's necessary to create the relationships. Now our group is pretty informal, and we all are spending so much time with one another. So our meetings are really awesome because of the relationships we've established. And then I think it's really important to make sure that you continuously get people to focus on the end goal, which is funding the organizations, communities, and individuals that are in most in need with our empowerment zone areas. They are all doing CRA giving already, but if we can impact those who need it the most, I think that's an even more important piece.
Well, thank you both very much. And that concludes the presentation. Happy to answer any questions that may exist.
So it looks like there was already one question posed, and it was, how long does it take to establish and launch a FIPO to the point of funding grantees? So I'll let Spike and Pedar take that first, and I'll jump in if I need to.
Well, I think the original year we had a meeting in maybe June or so, July, and then had a quick follow-up meeting and sometime in August, September with the original group of funders. And that I think led to identifying a project over, I think a final funding decision was made, February or March. So typically, at least annually, it's been, meeting in July or August, and then ultimate funding determinations, I think, are made in February, March. So it's definitely a process that takes time. And so it's more of a marathon than a sprint, I think, and that's meant to be an intentional way to engage the conversation and build who wants to engage and fund collectively year over year. Petter?
Yes, exactly what you said, Spike. The only thing I'll add is that I think we started meeting early in advance to kind of gather focus. But in terms of when the community learns about the RFP process, I think we have time to respond. And then once we get into the decision-making process, I think our goal is always to shorten that. So that process between launching the RFP and funding might be November, February, so maybe a 4-month process.
Yeah, I just want to add that though it can take what may seem like time to get from the beginning to the end, which is actually funding a project or programs, there's lots of great stuff that's happening in between. Throughout the entire process, funding organizations are learning about what's going on in the community more, learning more about the CBOs that are out there doing great work. And that doesn't stop, like doing the funding together doesn't stop the funding that takes place for each individual funding organization as well. And so just know that there's great stuff happening in the interim.
One additional item to note that's really important is the timing. So Petter may speak to this, but a number of the institutions for the year in advance, so for 2020, are making a lot of their funding determinations for 2021 in that September to December, that last 3-4 month band of time. So for them to make any commitments to 2021, they need to kind of know, at least the most, at a very general level, at least, having dollars allocated and set aside for the Sacramento FIPO effort in whatever entity or entities that ends up, culminating to focus on.
All right, so we have another question from Sandy, and it is FIPO's investments is in the form of grants, loans, or equity. I think this is an important question. So I'll let you go first, Petter or Spike, and then I'll jump in if necessary.
Go ahead, Petter.
Yeah, no, and add to it unless I'm leaving something out. But this is specifically grant opportunities from each individual funder.
Yeah, I think that part is really important to mention, is that this is, though it's a collaborative effort, it's still individualized funding from each funding organization. So it's not an effort in which the funds are collected by an entity like SHRA, and then we become the fiscal agent over the funding. Each individualized funder has their own individualized funding, grant funding process that the organization that is awarded has to go through. And so if there are 10 organizations who are participating in the FIPO opportunity, then the awardee or awardees would have to go to each individual organization to go through their process. We have another question is, are there COVID-19 impacts expected? I'll speak towards it first. As Spike mentioned, the pandemic did affect us having certain meetings, but we did end the last round of FIPO during the pandemic, and it was a really amazing thing to see that the funding organizations were able to provide funding to 2 organizations and recognize that there may need to be an effort to allocate those funds to something different than what had been proposed in their RFP. And so we were able to allow some flexibility due to COVID-19. Also, we are in the process right now of engaging with the funding institutions to see if it's possible to continue to fund CBOs during the pandemic, but do it in a different way than we had been doing before, to kind of streamline the process and once again kind of pivot and be flexible due to the pandemic. All right, we are 2 minutes over our time, but are there any other questions anyone might have? All right, seeing none, we want to be respectful of everyone's time. And so I want to thank Spike and thank Pedar for being a part of this presentation. Thank you so much. I want to thank Dr. Michael Huff for being our moderator. I want to give a special shout out to the AmeriCorps Vista members who are part of all of the Promise Zones, but I want to give a special shout out to my own Vistas. They're on here. But then also we have some very special Vistas who have joined this presentation from Minneapolis, from Minnesota, who this is actually their first week. And so I want to welcome them aboard to the Promise Zones. I want to remind everyone that you will be able to view this presentation and other presentations from the National Coalition of Promise Zones 2020 Federal Convening on the Sacramento Promise Zone Facebook page. I've just entered that into the chat box if you want to grab the address for that. Also, our planning team will be sending out the presentation slides to those individuals who registered for this presentation. So thank you so much for participating and joining. I hope this information was useful to you. Also would like to offer to anyone who would like to learn more about this process, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is jaustin@shra.org. So that's jaustin@shra.org. Please reach out to me anytime. I'd be glad to share more information or potentially connect you with Spike or Pedar as well. So I'll stop there. We're already over time. But thank you all. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.